In this video I'm going to show you how to create a bullet journal style garden tracker and show you 5 ways it can help you get the most value from your vegetable garden. Welcome back to Grown Frugal, and we're on location today in the sunny northeast on the beach, so I thought I'd take some time out and record some of the video outdoors. So if you've not been here before, on Grown Frugal we're all about how to save a bit of money and live life at a little less cost by growing food, by cooking food and experimenting with different ways to save money. And in today's video I'm showing you how to create a bullet journal style tracker for your veggie garden. So whether it's a kitchen garden like mine, or you have a few containers, or a larger garden, but maybe especially if you've got quite a small garden where space is at a premium, it's really important to get the most out of that space by choosing the right crops to grow that suit your soil, not somebody else's soil or temperature on their amazing Instagram garden, but what suits your own garden or your own space. And the only way to do that really is to experiment, but also track what works. So using some kind of garden journaling system is a brilliant way to learn from your mistakes, to celebrate successes, and to plan what you grow next year based on some evidence of what actually works for you. So I'm a really big advocate for planning and journaling your garden, and I use all different ways of doing that because I'm a planner and I love it. But today I'm going to show you the bullet journaling way. So let's do it. Okay, so our first step in setting up our tracker is to get our journal, or if you're not a bullet journaler, to use a piece of paper or a whiteboard and begin by setting a title. So I've called mine here Kitchen Garden 2019, and I'm going to use this across the calendar year, January to December. And then once you've got your title all set up, the second thing to do is to create a key. And the key is really important as we're going to use colours to colour in the tracker. So the categories I'm using in my tracker include a category for sowing, so that's sowing seeds indoors in modules, but also sown direct. I've got a key category for planting out, so planting out my modules outside. I've got a key category for harvesting, and I've got a key category for when the veg has finished. And then that last category there is when there's been an unexpected finish. So for that one, that's when something's happened, which has been a feature of my life this year. So life happens, and sometimes we can't pay attention to our crops, and so they finish unexpectedly early. So you can see the colours I'm using there, and for an unexpected finish I'm using a double pink line. So the first reason I think it's really useful to use a tracker is to help you make better decisions. So here's our very first tracker grid that I'm drawing out now. So I'm drawing a line for a particular crop. This one is going to be for leeks, and I've left enough space so that my grid has enough room for all of the calendar year, January, February, March, etc. And I've left some squares in between here that I can fill in. And then I add my crop down the side, and then what I'm going to do is to fill in the squares so that I know when I sowed my seeds, it was in modules in this case, when I planted them out, and then when I started harvesting. So I've started harvesting my leeks now, and I will continue that line on the end there until the leeks have stopped harvesting. What I've also done is just drawn a line down and made a note of which variety of leeks I started harvesting quite early, actually, in August. And the way this helps is that when I'm planning my garden next year, I can see exactly when I planted my leeks. I can see how long it took before I put them into the garden, because I find leeks really slow and I get a bit nervous and start to worry that I should have planted them out too early, too late. And actually my leeks have come out really well this year, so I'm happy with those timings. And if I'm growing leeks again next year, I can have a quick look back and think, oh, okay. Conversely, if I had had a disaster with my leeks this year, my tracker will show me very quickly when I planted out. So perhaps I planted out too early, or as I often do, I sowed seeds too early. So the first reason for making a tracker of your vegetable patch is to help you make good decisions. So this is the basics of any tracker that we do. We're drawing out a grid with the months on it, writing down our crop down the side, and then using the key code we've created to just have a very simple, all on one page look at what we did with any particular crop. So the second reason to use a tracker is to help you celebrate your successes in the garden and remember obstacles that you've faced. So here we are drawing our second tracker, and this one is for serpent squash in my case, which is kind of like a courgette. It's a heritage seed. And in this tracker now, I'm just using the first letters of the month to make it a bit quicker and a bit cleaner. And I'm going to mark on when I sowed, when I planted out, when I harvest, and when I finished. And I was very excited about this heritage seed, which was given to me by a neighbour, and I planted it far too early, and that meant I had to mollycoddle it through the early part of the season and look after it indoors, put it on several times. Then when it went outside, I had to wrap it in fleece, keep opening it up and double wrapping it and really looking after it, and that was all fine. But I want to make a note on my tracker here so that I know that actually it only survived because I mollycoddled it. It wasn't really a good idea to plant it on March the 10th, but I did do it, and I had an amazing crop of these lovely squash, and so it was a success. And then the other part of this tracker you'll notice is that I've used the double pink line to show that it finished quite early. And the reason for that was that we had a family emergency and I was away for a lot of the summer, so it was neglected and the serpent squash just didn't survive, so I ended it early. It was the best of years and the worst of years for this little serpent squash, and it's all down here on the tracker, and when I look back on it and I'm planning next year, I can learn what I can, have a bit of a laugh at how much I mollycoddled that seed, and give myself a pat on the back for having some success. So the third reason for using a tracker in the garden is so that you can have success with your succession planting. That's hard to say. Um, and for me, I'm doing a tracker here to demonstrate how I make an expanded tracker, so to have more space in the rows, so that I can mark the times for, in my case, lettuce succession planting. So I use Charles Dowding's no dig method of lettuce growing, where we're just picking the lettuce, and I only need to sow 3 to 4 batches a year to have lettuce pretty much all year round. And the timing of that is obviously quite important, and a tracker like this is helping me work out whether I'm getting the timing right. So I will, in the first column there, I can mark when I sowed my lettuce into modules, when I planted them out, and when I started harvesting. And then in the second row, note down when I began that process again. So by the time the first batch of lettuce is going to seed, the idea is that I'm ready to put in the next batch. And in a small space garden like mine, this is a real key to kind of saving money and making most of the space that you have. The fourth reason for using a tracker is to look at whether you're getting best value out of the crops that you're growing. This tracker here, I'm using it to track garlic, and garlic actually gets planted in the previous year. So if I've got a crop like that where I planted the previous year, I'll still have an annual tracker just like the others, but I'll draw an arrow and make a note of when I planted the garlic so I can see when it went in. And to look at the whole kind of best value there, I can see that my garlic has been taking up space in the beds for quite a long time. But looking at the tracker, the timing of when it's sitting there is actually when I'm not growing much else. It's right through the winter and it just sits there and doesn't need any care. And what I also do for crops like garlic, where I'm quite new to growing them, is to just make a note of what kind of quantity I got for the bed space that it took. So in this case, I had one bulb of garlic, and I planted all the cloves out. They were all pretty successful, I think. And then I've made a note of how many garlic actually came to fruition. So that's another reason for using your tracker. So the final reason for using a garden tracker is to help you worry less about all that veg growing and enjoy the journey. And so often as gardeners, we find that at certain times of year there can be a bit of a frenzy about whose tomatoes are ripening first. And then we can get into comparing ourselves to others and finding our growing skills a bit lacking. And this is just a normal mind process, but nonetheless, it takes us away from enjoying our gardening journey. So this year, when a friend of mine was worrying about when the tomatoes would be ready, I was able to look back in my journal and find out exactly when my tomatoes ripened last year. And it seems silly, but it just gave my mind a little bit of peace that there was no need to get too worried. It was perfectly normal that I didn't have loads of tomatoes where I live in the UK. So tracking something like your tomatoes, as I'm doing here, and making a note of the date when they're ready to be harvested can just bring you a little peace of mind so that you can stay in the moment and worry less and just enjoy your gardening as it happens, whatever the weather, whatever the disasters, whatever the fantastic successes, to just enjoy the journey. So that is as good a reason for tracking as any other. So that's it. That's how we can use a bullet journal style tracker to keep an eye on the garden. So I hope you like the video and you find this useful. What do you do in the garden to track and reflect and learn? Let me know in the comments below what your system is so that we can all learn from each other. So on the channel I post weekly videos, so do subscribe if you want to keep in touch, and I'll see you next week.